Welcome to Plus One Forward, the podcast powered by the Apocalypse, where we talk about tabletop role-playing games using or inspired by the Apocalypse engine. I'm your MC, Rach, and I'm joined today by my guest, April Kit Walsh. Hey, April, thanks for coming on the show.
Hi, Rach. Thanks so much for having me.
How did you get your start with Powered by the Apocalypse?
I got my start. I was introduced to Apocalypse World itself. I had just discovered the narrative-focused world of indie RPGs, had been playing some Fate, and was hearing good things, and decided to give it a try, and had a great time.
Amazing.
Read a sitch.
For our first segment, Read a Sitch, my guests and I will talk about some aspect of Powered by the Apocalypse play or table culture that they want to cast a spotlight upon. April, what about Powered by the Apocalypse do you think we should be paying a little bit more attention to?
I've been really excited by the way that some Powered by the Apocalypse games have innovated to focus the narrative on intense feelings and emotions between characters. So I'm thinking of examples like the way that Masks uses conditions rather than caring about physical harm. Instead, you wind up with these conditions like afraid or angry, and then the way you recover from those is either by getting emotional support or by acting out and doing something destructive that's soothing, but not necessarily a healthy way of coping. So that's a deep example of a way of centering the character's feelings and emotional states that I've tried to borrow from and innovate on in developing Thirsty Sword Lesbians.
Do you think that Powered by the Apocalypse games with examples that you cited, such as Masks, allow for a different focus on emotional play than other games on the market?
I think they do. I think coming from, well, originally very traditional games for the first decades of my role-playing life, and then even into Apocalypse World itself, I think games like Masks and Monster Hearts and The Watch that explicitly use mechanics to focus the story and the attention on the experiences and inner worlds and interactions of the characters have developed a lot of neat techniques for doing that, for helping people at the table explore either difficult or interesting or exciting feelings through their characters and stories.
When I started in role-playing games myself, a lot of the emotional spaces were abstract. I mean, to be completely honest, I started in free-form role-playing games online, so it was all emotional abstraction. How do you feel Powered by the Apocalypse mechanically supports that emotional exploration?
So there are several different layers to the way that Thirsty Sword Lesbians in particular does that. To sort of borrow from a pre-existing example, I think the opportunity to be in a really intense emotional moment and have the moves there as a safety tool just by their very existence. If you're role-playing this moment and it becomes too intense, you can say, okay, how about it's time that we roll the emotional support move? Or how about it's time that we roll the entice move? And the mechanics are there to support you in that. And the mechanics are also there to help modulate the cadence of those emotional moments. So it can be very fun to be in a free-form situation and sort of achieve by consensus what the next beat is that you want to hit. But it's also very fun to have the dice mix that up and surprise you sometimes. And one of the moves in particular that I went back and forth in thinking about, does this ask for dice, or is this something you just narrate, is that moment of giving emotional support to another character. Because you don't want to be at the table and roleplay this really intense connecting moment, and then have the dice tell you, no, actually you didn't connect. And I think I'll have more to say about that when we talk about Thirsty Sword Lesbians in particular, but I think the way that Apocalypse World and the Powered by the Apocalypse engine helps with that is something that I emphasize very much in this game, which is that a roll of a 6- is a narrative downbeat. It is not sort of a procedural failure. It doesn't mean you haven't achieved what you were trying to do, but it means that either that's the case or there are unforeseen consequences. So if this were a game that had mechanics for busting into a room, you might bust into the room and see that your ex is there and it's an ambush and she has prepared her spider minions to get you. So, in an emotional moment, it's important that the dice not reverse what you are feeling at the table. And the use of the language downbeat or mixed beat or upbeat is explicitly part of the way that the game describes what 6 minus 7 through 9 and 10 plus correspond to remind you every time to think about what does it mean that there's a narrative downbeat here. It doesn't have to mean failure. It can be really fun if you're trying to emotionally connect and you all think it's fun for it not to land. The thing the person said is heard the wrong way or actually misses the mark, and then you have this misunderstanding. That's really fun. And it can also be fun to be about to connect. You're about to kiss, and then the window blasts open, and a robot jumps in and abducts somebody. That's all good melodrama. So ultimately, that's one of the reasons why the dice are involved, and one of the reasons why the Powered by the Apocalypse design philosophy is appealing for me and for the stories that the game is trying to tell.
I want to go back to, you mentioned safety tools a while back
Mm-hmm.
and explore that a little bit more. I've noticed within role-playing discussion recently the idea of including safety tools as mechanics and not a supplemental device or supplemental mechanic that's on the table. Why do you feel that Powered by the Apocalypse has more potential for inherent safety mechanics within the system and the structure?
I don't think that there are any words on a page that can substitute for approaching the conversation that is the game with empathy and caring about everybody else at the table. And that said, there are 4 different approaches that I think Thirsty Sword Lesbians in particular uses, and that's the most developed form of my thinking on safety and consent at the table. But I think, first of all, it is important that the thing be baked into the mechanics. And so, Powered by the Apocalypse lets you, as a game designer, make some choices and recommendations for how the narrative authority in telling the story is going to be shared among the people who are playing the game. And so you get to say in your game design, this game is never going to tell you or empower someone else to tell you that now you've fallen in love or now you have to take some particular action that has emotional significance. What Thirsty Sword Lesbians does is it creates bribes that can make you feel that pressure or that temptation without ever overriding your autonomy to decide for your character how they're going to react to that moment of temptation. So that's one level of safety, is just not having the mechanics force you into things that feel uncomfortable or things that would require you to invoke a more explicit safety mechanic, because the normal operation of the mechanics is one that's more likely to feel comfortable. The second element is something I was talking about before, where you don't have to be good at flirting or zingers or any of that to enjoy role-playing games where your characters are doing those things. And it might be fun to improv that and to have that conversation, or you might decide you're at the point where you've had enough of trying to do that and you are ready to invoke the mechanics. And you don't have to be you don't have to be witty all the time or ever. And the game also makes a ton of space for awkward disaster lesbians. Totally valid. But the mechanics are there for you to help you choose your own level of embodying those difficult emotions, as opposed to telling the story with a little bit of remove. And that's something that everyone has different desires about, and the game tries to accommodate, and PBTA can accommodate a wide range of preferences in that regard. And then finally, explicit safety tools are important, in part because they remind everybody that we care about each other more than we care about telling a good story or being true to our characters. And the sort of spiel at the beginning of a session or an adventure, and then the physical artifact, the reminder of having a little card that has a check mark on it or an X on it, does some work in establishing the norm that we're going to preserve everyone's safety and well-being. Obviously, an index card on the table isn't going to do all of the work of making everyone feel comfortable expressing when they have an emotional need. So in combination, all these elements sort of do the best that we can to do that. And then in a lot of PBTA games, there's an end of session move. And in Thirsty Sword Lesbians, you've got the typical XP triggers at the end of session. Did you reinforce a theme of the game? Like, did you leap into danger with daring and panache? Did you confess your love? And the whole group, this is a group reward, so if anybody did any of these things, each character gets XP for it. And then, in addition, there's an XP trigger, did someone at the table use a safety mechanic? And this can be as simple as calling for a check-in. Does anyone need a bio break? Or it can be needing to X-card something that you don't want in the game. And the purpose of that is twofold. One is to further reinforce the norm that safety tools are a normal and valuable and useful thing to do. And second, to give you a moment at the end of the session where you're thinking about whether you used those safety tools. And if you didn't, is it because everything felt comfortable for everybody, or was there another reason? Was there actually something that in retrospect you wish that you had thought to use a safety tool for? And it's an invitation to have a conversation about that. And I think in games that try to discuss very emotional and charged situations and feelings, it's important to have a robust system of approaching safety and consent so that people can engage with that to the extent that they want to. Otherwise, if you don't feel like you have that safety, either with your group or with your game that you're playing, then you're not going to engage with those issues, and you'll miss out on stories and experiences exploring them.
April, I think it's time to get a little bit deeper into your game. I think it's time to open our brains and get into Thirsty Sword Lesbians. What do you say?
Absolutely. If you open my brain, you will find a lot of Thirsty Sword Lesbians.
Open your brain.
So tell us about the setting. What is Thirsty Sword Lesbians about, other than what it says on the tin?
So Thirsty Sword Lesbians is a game about complex queer characters who grapple with relatable emotional conflicts. And they do this in a universe of swords, magic, and melodrama. It's tied to that emotional genre rather than any particular time period or setting. So if you have any setting where swords clash and hearts race, that's perfect for Thirsty Sword Lesbians. And you can use it to tell stories in an existing setting, and what you'll wind up with is a lot like slash fiction of that setting. So if you ran a Thirsty Star Wars game, a Thirsty Star Wars Lesbians game, then you would wind up with Star Wars slash fic, or Highlander if you have immortal sword-wielding lesbians in the shadows of the modern world. They're going to wind up flirting over the course of their sword duels. They're not just going to want to decapitate each other. They're going to find out that actually they have other needs and other ways they want to relate to one another.
Well, I am definitely in. As someone who is very experienced with fanfic, was that one of your big inspirations?
Yes, fanfic, and in particular, that moment where you're watching a piece of mass media and you're screaming at the screen, "Make it gay, you cowards!" That feeling is a big driver behind wanting to tell those stories in RPGs and ultimately wanting to tailor an RPG specifically for those kinds of moments. Specifically, that feeling of celebrating queer love and power and getting to see our representation having fun, falling in love, and also being complex human beings and getting the full gamut of experiences, not as viewed from an outside gaze, but embodying and celebrating what it means to queer love and queer the stories that are all around us.
Amazing. How are the mechanics in your game different than Apocalypse World?
I'm just going to list a few of my favorite differences from Apocalypse World. I think one of the things that is very exciting when you are sitting down to pick playbooks is each playbook is defined by a signature emotional conflict that playbook embodies. So for instance, the Trickster is a character who craves closeness but fears vulnerability. And the way they deal with this is they have these disguises and deceptions, but they also have this mechanic called too many feelings, where if they succeed at suppressing their feelings enough and not expressing them and not confessing them, then they're likely to have an outburst and just it's all going to come out at once. And so the mechanics won't let you actually hide the way that character wishes that they could. The mechanics encourage you to either bottle it up and explode, because that's fun, or to confess things along the way. And each playbook has a different conflict as well as different mechanics that reinforce and highlight that conflict in themselves and sometimes with others.
Yeah, the more you talk about it, the more amazing this game sounds, not gonna lie.
I hope that's true. I really wanted to have this experience of telling these stories and being at a table with other queer folks or with anybody who's interested in exploring stories about power and celebration among marginalized voices. And I think the game is not just for queer folks, but also something that speaks across marginalizations in some of the playbooks that explore themes like assimilation versus self-expression, like the beast who literally can transform into a monstrous form. That's hot as hell, to be quite honest, but not at all acceptable in the civilized society that has power over them. Instead, that society wants their feral to be at the 0 level so that they fit in and are conformed. And that's when society won't hassle them, but they won't have access to any of their beast powers. That's something that isn't limited to the queer experience, and I think isn't something that is limited to queer players at all. I think if you play this game, then hopefully it will deliver an experience that will be fun and potentially bring you to new places in your role-playing life. So another way that Thirsty Sword Lesbians is different from Apocalypse World is the way that violence is used in the narrative. So violence has a nuanced role in Thirsty Sword Lesbians. Physical harm is not at all the focus of any mechanic. Like Masks, the game uses conditions, difficult emotional states, to represent the stress and trauma of going through things that are dangerous or emotionally hurtful. And there is, at the same time, a motif of sword fighting. And typically, if you are crossing swords with someone, that does not mean necessarily that you're going to roll the fight move. The fight move is there for those cases where you're trying to incapacitate your opponent. And that's something that sometimes is necessary, but is usually not going to be a first resort. And there are other moves that interact with that intense moment of physical conflict. You actually have more ways of figuring somebody out when you are locked into that kind of close conflict. Every playbook gets some bonus questions that they get to ask if they try to figure someone out during a physical conflict with them. And the fight move itself winds up providing some avenues of exiting the sword fight moment. You might wind up learning something really important about the other person. You might wind up persuading them of something. And the role of the swords is not to glorify physically hurting or threatening each other, but as a focus on this aesthetic moment of being in conflict in close quarters and creating this pressure cooker where something about your dynamic with that other person is going to change dramatically when you come out of it.
You can even see that with the way the swords are presented within the playbooks. It's not, here's a weapon and here's the stats. It's aesthetic. Here's this really cool thing, and what does it say about you?
So one of the conceits of Thirsty Sword Lesbians is pretty much everyone has a sword. Certainly the PCs have swords, and they're an important part of your expression, along with, in the looks category, your eyes and your clothes. Your sword is just as important.
What's your favorite move and why?
Of the basic moves, I'm most proud of the smitten mechanic. So the smitten mechanic is something that you invoke. It's a move that you invoke when your character has become smitten with someone else, and it's always your choice. The game doesn't tell you they have 3 strings on you and now you're smitten. That's not a thing. It's always your decision. And then what you do is you answer a playbook question. So the trickster that I told you about earlier, who's so afraid about being vulnerable, when they become smitten with someone, they have to answer, what secret about you are you sure would cause them to reject you? So we established that the character has this insecurity, it's focused on a particular plot element, and it's a way of making that romantic journey interesting. It's an obstacle, it's a challenge, and it's a signal from the player that they want to focus on that in the story, and it's an aid for the group to make that interesting and conflicted. And if you have two PCs smitten with each other, you'll have two different plot elements corresponding to their emotional conflicts that are going to make that interesting. And it's a way that the game helps you to create that drama and to help the characters put a fine point on the emotional conflicts that they're each facing.
All right, I think I'm ready to show off my thirsty sword lesbian to the world. Are you ready to run me a game?
I would love to. Let's hear about your thirsty sword lesbian.
All right, so we're going to move into Act Under Fire, where April is going to run me a short game of thirsty sword lesbians.
It is time to act under fire.
So I'm going to be playing the scoundrel. My character is named Kiri. April, what's the scoundrel's whole deal?
So The Scoundrel is a playbook whose conflict is about new horizons and how tempting and delightful they seem versus having loyalty to the people and things that the scoundrel cares about. So the scoundrel can hurt a lot of feelings, and hopefully Kiri is going to at least have some fun, if not some personal growth.
So Kiri, her pronouns are she, her. She has playful eyes, tight clothes. I'm imagining some kind of leathers or pleathers that reflect light in dynamic ways. And I imagined her sword as being flashy. The sword itself is chrome with a hilt that glows orange, which makes it look like it's on fire when it's really not.
Fantastic. So our sword lesbian adventure is going to be set in space, and we're going to do a little bit of scenario character generation right now, because Thirsty Sword Lesbians, in focusing on characters' inner conflict and emotions, is something that you want to be tailored to the individual characters, and there's guidance in the rules for how to do that, and the playbook conflicts are really a helpful hook to do that as a GM. So since the scoundrel is in conflict about her loyalties and connections versus the appeal of some new horizon, let's flesh out a little bit someone that she's made a promise to and someone who's offering her something that she wants. So what do you think? We can spin out this universe as we go, and tell me about someone that Kiri has made a promise to that's important to her.
I think there was a childhood friend back in the academy that Kiri made a promise to that they would go and be legit crew members. Maybe military, maybe private, but Kiri has, of course, shoved that aside to go live a very scoundrel, roguish life. Do you got a name list?
As long as we're in space, let's go with Stella.
Stella sounds amazing. Yeah, let's go with Stella. Former friend from the academy, supposed to be a business partner, not so much anymore.
Great. And then continuing the star theme, I think Astra is the new flame, the one who's offering something that Stella absolutely would not approve of, but has some appeal for the scoundrel. I'm going to suggest that Astra be from some kind of toxic authority. So in Thirsty Sword Lesbians, there's the idea of toxic powers, and this can be an internal thing, like a cult within an otherwise healthy society. It can be an external thing, like a colonizing empire. So maybe Astra is a famous swordswoman from the United Empire, which has been encroaching on these free territories, and Stella, your childhood friend, would want to team up, join up, have a cause, go into an enterprise with you, crew a vessel together with you to oppose them. But what is it that's so appealing about Astra for Kiri?
It's the mystery of all that power. Like,
Mm,
how did this person accumulate this power? I think there's a natural charisma there, a little bit magnetic, that drives Kiri there like a moth to the flame.
absolutely. Love it. So we're going to set this story on a space station that is in the system where you and Stella grew up, and it is playing host to a delegation from the United Empire. And the diplomatic muckety-mucks are talking, but what Kiri is struck by is in the leisure dome of this space station, some of the United Empire swords people who are looking around with a very judgmental glare. In the United Empire, there is a very particular way that you dress. It is sharp. It is not revealing. It is of an approved color, and they are particularly frowning when they see purple being part of people's outfits. So have you met Astra before? Or are you admiring her from afar?
I think it's definitely an admire from afar situation. I think Astra shows up on enough news feeds that Kiri has definitely seen her and had feelings towards her, but they've never really talked.
Right. Well, you are no longer admiring her from afar because she is here. Her sword is still sheathed, but she has her boot on the head of this blue-skinned alien wearing a very nice purple business sheath for their entire tail body. She and her fellow Imperials are boasting about how soon this station will be cleaned up and Imperial order will be imposed, and everyone here had better learn how to behave. What does Kiri think about this? And what does she do?
I think Kiri's feeling is Astra must just have the wrong idea. This is definitely someone who I have a huge crush on, and I could definitely change them. So Kiri is going to make a dramatic entrance, I think.
Great. And the only question I have is, Kiri's tight clothes, you said leather. Is there any purple in there?
There's purple when it's reflected off me, and there's definitely purple reflected off me right now.
All right. Love it. What are you doing? You are making a dramatic entrance. Are you using a scoundrel playbook move?
Oh, I am definitely using show off.
Oh, fantastic. Tell us about it.
When you make a dramatic entrance, roll plus grace, and there's a list of options depending on how I roll.
Let's see how you roll.
That would be a 10.
Wow. All right. So that's a narrative upbeat. Tell us which options you're going to pick.
I'm definitely going to have all attention on me right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to hold the attention of one particular person to the end of my speech.
Ooh, a speech.
A dramatic speech.
I take it Astra is the person whose attention you would like to hold?
Is there anyone else in this space worthy of having their attention on me for the entire length of my speech?
I mean, there might be, but I think your attention is absolutely fixed on Astra, so let's hear your speech.
Kiri is going to say, I think there's a terrible misunderstanding that's happened here, members of the United Empire. You might not have an idea of the way this space station rolls and the amount of joy and pleasure that being part of this culture brings to us. And at that point, she's going to dramatically pull out her sword and point it to Astra and say, "May I welcome you to a friendly bout?"
So, first of all, you have distracted them, and the poor oppressed alien has slithered away and is safe. Are you trying to entice Astra here?
Oh, I'm definitely trying to entice Astra here.
All right. She has been attending to your every word since you arrived in such a dramatic fashion. Let's go ahead and roll the entice move.
That is only a 7. That is not quite as good as my dramatic entrance.
All right. With a 7, that means that I get to choose something from the list for Astra's response. And in this case, Astra is delighted to cross swords with you. She draws her own blade and steps toward you until the two swords are just barely touching. and she says in a low voice, "A friendly bout, and by the end, I'll have slashed all of that improper clothing right off you. Defend yourself." This is her giving you something that she thinks you want, which is one of the options for the recipient of an entice move. At this point, I would suggest that we could do a little bit of banter, and you can let me know what your intent is. So it's not the case in this game that every time you cross swords, you are rolling the fight move. That's only something you roll if you're trying to incapacitate the person with violence. You can also try to figure them out. You can keep flirting with them, or you can do something else. In this case, if you are doing something that does not involve having your sword in conflict with her, you're going to have to defy danger. So if you were to, turn around and run off or what have you, that's the way that I would resolve that. So tell me about how Kiri is reacting to this.
Oh, Kiri's going definitely all in, and I think she's trying to get a read on Astra, judging off of how Astra is positioning herself, how aggressively and defensively is she taking positions, what her swords play is like. This is someone she's had emotions for from a distance, but this is the first time she's gotten up close. She's really trying to get a read on her.
Okay, love it. What I'm going to suggest then is you go ahead and roll the dice to figure out a person, and we'll role play the conversation to get the answers to the questions that you get to ask.
And that would be another 7.
Okay. In this case, in a mixed beat, the figure out a person move means that she's going to get to ask you a question as well. You're going to get to ask too. Plus, since you're in a physical conflict, one of the conceits of this game is that there are certain insights that you only get when you cross blades with someone. So you get to ask an additional question from your playbook. Why don't we go ahead and just talk that through in character? Just ask and answer in character. You don't always have to do it that way. You can get the answer, at a meta level. But for the sake of this one shot, let's put everything on the table. So what does Kiri say?
Kiri's going to leave herself open and defend, kind of acting like she's blocking these attacks at the last minute, as if she wasn't anticipating where Astra was going to strike. And then remark that's some beautiful swordsmanship. Where did you learn that?
Well, of course, I was top of my class at the Imperial Academy, but you may, if you are, as I suspect, schooled in the ways of swordsmanship, recognize a few things that I picked up during the conquest of Galadia Prime. And with that, I'm just going to assume that you are familiar enough with the Galadian sword technique that you recognize as she tries to capture your blade in hers and move it to the side to get closer.
That's some very unorthodox swords technique for a member of the United Empire.
The United Empire is far more enjoyable than you might think. You tried to attract me with promises of pleasure, but you've never been to the pleasure worlds of the inner core. If you were to join us, then I would take you there myself. And she is asking the question, how could I get you to join the United Empire?
It's tantalizing, Kiri says. But how deep do your mysteries go? How much depth can you promise me? Is this just going to be a one-night stand, or does it go further? So her answer is basically, how long are you willing to commit to having me run away off to the Empire? Her answer is, well, how long do you see this relationship with me running off to the Empire and maybe us being a thing?
I don't think I've seen the extent of your prowess just yet, stranger. Stop holding back. So the answer is basically, if she's impressed with you, then your chances are better, but you've explicitly been holding back in your maneuvers, so she wants you to impress her.
Okay, and does that count as my second question, or is that just banter back and forth?
I think that was a second question.
It definitely fits the mood of the scene.
So you've got one more, and I think your first one was one of your scoundrel ones, so it can be anything from the list.
So Kiri goes in aggressively and tries to push Astra back to take a step back and use her sword to block Astra's and sort of firmly hold it back so they can lock eyes. She's like, what are you hoping to get out of this space station?
So as playful as she has been with Kiri, she is committed to the task of bringing this world under the Imperial heel, and she is hoping to do so in a flashy and impressive way that will send a message to other worlds not to defy the Empire. You can ask in character the question, and the answer that she gives that gives you that impression is something like, I'm here to display the full glory of the Empire for all to witness, and to show that defying us is most unwise. At this point, you see that Stella, your childhood friend, has arrived and sees you in conflict, and she says, Kiri, you can't reason with them. Stop holding back. Humiliate her. Show everyone that it's not futile to resist the Empire. And she's going to try to influence you with a string. In specific, if you go ahead and do try to humiliate or incapacitate Astra, then you'll get to mark an XP, and this is part of the bribery system in Thirsty Sword Lesbians, where nothing ever tells you what to do, but it can tempt you to do things one way or the other. So Stella, because you both care about each other, has a string on you that she wants to spend for this. So how does Kiri respond?
Kiri's definitely going to respond from this prompt from Stella.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's going to happen is Kiri flashes a grin back to Stella and then looks over at Astra and says, well, show me the might of the Empire right now. Show me the swiftness and the ferocity that you're going to use to bring this space station in line. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to use heat of the moment, and I'm trying to get Astra to sort of overextend and basically fall flat on her face.
Beautiful. So heat of the moment is a signature scoundrel move. Go ahead and roll it.
That would be an 8.
All right. So tell us about your move.
In heat of the moment, when you taunt someone into a course of action, roll plus daring. If the target is an NPC, on a 7 to 9, choose one. Create an opportunity for you or your allies, or they give you a string on them.
Great.
I think I'm going to create an opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. I think you have taunted Astra, the Imperial Knight, and she will respond like, oh, I thought you'd never ask, and charges forward, and you're able to pull out of the way in time that she overshoots, and she winds up between you and Stella. And so Stella draws her own sword, and it's a glass sword with sparkling stars in a black interior, and says, then let's face them together, Kiri. I think that's going to be the end of our scene.
That was so cool.
Kiri, very cool. Thank you so much for playing and diving into the melodrama of the game.
That was great. I would love to see where this goes in a whole session. April, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. If our listeners are looking to follow more of your work, where can they find you online?
Thank you so much for having me. You can find me at gayspaceship.com. My gaming imprint is gayspaceshipgames.com. On Twitter, that's gayspaceshipgms. And if you go to swordlesbians.com, it will take you right to the page for the game. You can sign up now for the open playtest with Evil Hat Productions, which is going to be publishing the game. It is going to be a physical game that you can hold in your hands one day, and I'm tremendously excited about that. And I also really appreciate everyone who is joining the playtest and giving feedback and sharing stories and making fan art. So please do some of those things, and I look forward to seeing you on Twitter and in the playtest.
Amazing, and thank you once again for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Plus One Forward is a production of the Gauntlet community, Richard Rogers and Rach Shelkey. You can find us at gauntlet-rpg.com or follow us on Twitter at @+1FWD. If you would like to support our show, visit our Patreon site at patreon.com/gauntlet. The games mentioned on this show use the Apocalypse engine, which is a creation of Vincent and Magay Baker. The music for Plus One Forward is from the Savage Aural Hotbed CD Gomi Daiko. The songs used are Gomi Daiko, Metal Version, and Drowning Attitude. You can find more amazing tunes by Savage Aural Hotbed on their website, www.savageauralhotbed.com.
Hey listeners, Jason here. I want to let you know that Brindlewood Bay is now available in the Gauntlet's $6 Patreon feed. Brindlewood Bay is a Powered by the Apocalypse game about a group of elderly women solving murder mysteries in and around the namesake town. As they investigate these crimes, they become increasingly aware of the activities of a dark cult called the Midwives of the Fragrant Void, and will have to come up with a plan to stop them. The game is basically Murder, She Wrote meets The Shadow over Innsmouth, and we think you're going to love it. Your $6 pledge in February gets you everything you need to play Brindlewood Bay. The core rules, including a file for printing them as a zine, character sheets and other play aids, plus 5 mysteries: Dad Overboard, All Hallows Scream, The Great Brindlewood Bay Bake Off, Jingle Bell Shock, and A Murder Most Mucky. So head over to patreon.com/gauntlet and make a $6 pledge to get Brindlewood Bay. Keep your pledge active and you'll also get new issues of our magazine Codex every month. Thanks.